This behemoth got towed all the way from Oklahoma down here to South Texas to get a major engine repair done. And this is the state in which I received the truck. The owner had it at another diesel shop in Oklahoma, and they told him that in order to pull the oil pan, they would need to remove the engine. I'd say he made the right choice by pulling it out of that shop, considering this is how we got the fuel system for this truck, right next to all the dirt in the floorboard. While they were loading all his parts, they made sure to give him a turbo that looks like it belongs on this truck, except for they never pulled his turbo. They bought a Cummins piston, or at least what they thought was a Cummins piston. This is the back seat of the truck. Got a mess of parts in here. Luckily, these engines are extremely simple. This is the reman cylinder head. And then we have like some 18-wheeler upper radiator hose assembly or something. That doesn't belong to this truck. Make sure to take these and put them in the appropriate place. This was the shape of the engine block when they picked it up. That's a number 5 cylinder that's a little janky, but she'll survive. Thankfully, they didn't prep the block yet with like a die grinder or something. But every one of these little holes here is an oil port, so we're gonna have to clean those out. And they got the open charge pipes just full of shit down there too. That's not good. So, do better. Also, if you're gonna leave an engine open for a while, we hose them down with WD-40, and then we put a plastic bag with some blocks of wood over it to prevent stuff like this from happening. We got everything unloaded from the truck. Now we gotta make it a little more organized so we can see what we do and don't have. Got all the EGR stuff here, valve cover, fan shrouds, alternators and pulleys, and the cylinder head stuff over here. We have 6 injectors, 12 rocker arms, 6 pedestals, 12 good push rods. Like, everything's here as far as the mechanical aspect of things. I got all the bolts halfway organized. I can't tell you where every one of them goes, but it's kind of like a puzzle. As you start going back together, they fall in their place. But I also think we have extra hardware because these are like really rusty. Now we're going to tear in this fuel rail, see how bad she looks. Here we took a fuel rail pressure sensor out, and we're looking down inside the fuel rail, and you can see that little golden nugget is a piece of dirt. That'll hang an injector, and there's some more smaller pieces of dirt here. Only by this one port. Everything else looks really clean down in here. So we'll be able to flush that out, but that's why you don't store these like they did. You always got to cap those ports off. The main thing we were looking for besides dirt was if there was rust in this rail to indicate it had water in it at some point, because we do see that quite often. All the fuel lines on this thing look pretty good, with the exception, you can see all that rust inside. It's on both ends. So we will not be reusing this line. And I believe that to be related directly to how they stored this. They probably left this one on the cowl of the truck and it got submerged in water or something, because all the other ones look perfect. This is my bore scope looking inside one of the fuel lines. You can see all the sand inside there. Here we're looking at the engine, and you can see they left the fuel rail feed line on the injection pump, pointed straight up to the sky, and it has rust on the tip, and there is definitely debris inside that line. This was the line that was still on the truck, and you can see the poopies that were down in it. It's not very good for the fuel system. This is what the fluid looked like on the other 4 lines, so they were in good shape. That's not very good for that coolant hose to have this heavy thing dangling from it. Sweet, both the batteries are in good shape. The shop that took it apart did us a solid and threw away the air intake piece that goes from the turbo to the air filter box. We're also missing the engine coolant temperature sensor on the cylinder head here. Love the hardware laying on the cowling, so you get the rust marks. Mint. Went ahead and removed the turbocharger, and inside you can see debris from that failed engine. Looks like part of a valve seat. That is definitely chunks of valve seat. We're going to disassemble this turbo entirely to make sure there's not debris stuck in the vanes, but right now it's looking pretty good. That was about a chore to get this thing apart, but we did, and everything looks good. And this is how the vanes operate on these units here. They go into this plate here on the turbine housing. In order to do an oil pan in the chassis on these trucks, you have to pick up the engine, and typically that means you're doing it from underneath the truck with an engine hoist over the top. But we got tired of working on the ground, so we built this adapter for our transmission jack that saddles the AC compressor mount and bolts to the engine block next to the ECM or PCM on this truck, and then we'll just jack it up. Well, this isn't going to be as straightforward as I thought. These 5500 Dodges, these engine cross members are about twice as wide as a regular truck, so picking up the engine does not give us enough room to slide the oil pan down because it's hitting there. So we got a couple of floor jacks on the pinch welds, and we took out all the body mount bolts, and now we got the engine up high enough to oil pan out. Man, this thing looks clean in here. 190,000 original miles, one owner. Bearings look really good for having 200,000 miles on them. We're just gonna put these back in because there'd be no point in changing just one rod bearing set. Well, we got her out. This is the damaged piston, obviously, and you can see that the pieces of debris smashed this aluminum down and pinched this upper ring to where it doesn't move at all anymore. It's just stuck there. You see the gaps nice and closed here. But the cylinder wall looks fine. We're gonna we got a brand new Cummins piston and ring set coming. Made sure it's standard bore and the part number on the piston matches, so we're good to go. Now the prep work for reassembly begins, starting with removing all the old gasket material. That's a job for Michael. Now they claimed that a part of the intake air heater broke off and went into the cylinder. Typically that would be a nut. They said that the nut was still there, but an actual piece of the metal grid came apart and went into the piston. I don't see any evidence of that. All I see is lots of broken valve seat material, but without having the original parts and been the one tearing it down, it's all speculation. This is a rusty engine block. This is Michael. He's gonna show us how to bottom tap the block before I turn him loose on a customer's engine. There you go. See how much tap is protruding through the block? We're gonna get that to damn near flush. And you'll feel it whenever you're cutting these cast iron blocks. They cut really easy. You don't have to worry about backing the tap up. You literally just keep going until it bottoms out. And you'll feel the tap just like spring load. And that's when you know you're at the bottom. So I've already showed Michael, and right there. Back it up, and that hole's done. Now it's Michael's turn to do this entire 6.7 Cummins block. And we put blue tape over the deck surface, and we just come in here and cut a little X. We're gonna go ahead and do the tap procedure, and then we can blow out all the shavings and drill bit oil and debris, and none of it gets into the engine. Look at him go. Tapping all them holes. Michael, keep turning. Faster. No, don't break it off in the block. Michael got all the holes bottom tapped, and the whole reason of this, that you perform this procedure, is so that the studs all go down into the block the same amount. It's not something that has to be done, but it sure does make my OCD happy. And it also gives equal thread engagement in the block so that you get even distortion with the stud. Now we have to get those shavings out, so we're gonna put a little brake clean down the hole and then blow it out with air. Look at all this debris. Gross. And none of that little metal pieces are gonna be going down in the engine because we have all the tape over it. Here's one of them holes that Michael done up for us. She looks real clean. You can see where that tap bottomed out in the block there. All our parts started showing up for this thing. We got the ARP 625 head studs, which are the better ones. We've got Bosch Reman injectors and connector tubes, Mopar filters, Cummins head gasket set, and a brand new Cummins piston, a Mopar fan clutch. I prefer the Felpro oil pan gaskets because Cummins has started like cutting their gaskets to fit them in a smaller box. I don't like that. We got a couple of Mopar fuel lines, the Black Market Performance heater hose upgrade, it's a must, and the intake heater upgrade as well from Black Market Performance to keep this from happening again. We got a Cummins thermostat, 180 degree, because this truck is on a diet. The turbo seals and new hardware for the exhaust. So let's start putting this old girl together. This is the Black Market Performance billet intake plenum for a cabin chassis truck, since the one that was for this truck is missing. And since the other shop failed to give him the rest of his intake parts, he's got a nice SMB to go on here. The OEM piston was made in USA. The genuine Cummins piston is made in India. And then this is the one that the other company supplied, which is a counterfeit Cummins piston. You can see it doesn't have the Cummins logo on it. The box looks like a Cummins box, but it is not. And it's not the same piston. It is made in China, I'm sure. Overall, the counterfeit piston looks really nice. The casting looks cleaner than the genuine Cummins part. Down in these oil holes, it's smoother than the Cummins. But it's not a genuine Cummins part, so we're not going to put it in. They look really, really similar, but I've seen cheap pistons crack on top here. We had a 700 horse common rail that cracked the top of a Felpro diesel piston. So only going to use what we know works. My main concern with the counterfeit piston was the piston to wall clearance, because this is not a Cummins part. I wasn't sure that their tolerances on the skirt diameter would be correct. This one's actually closer to what the OEM piston is, as opposed to this genuine Cummins part. We measured the skirts of all the pistons, and this one is a 0.5 thousandths larger than the factory piston, and this is 1.5 thou larger. This engine does have some miles on it, so the piston skirts could be a little wore down, but they do look pretty good. So we are going to make sure to check piston to wall clearance to make sure we're not going to be creating a problem here. We are going to dingleberry hone that number 5 cylinder. That way it looks a little prettier, and it deglazes the cylinder for the new rings. Before we commence to honing this cylinder, we put a rubber plug in the crankshaft for the oil galley, and we're going to have to spread some grease around the top of the crankshaft to keep the filings out of the bearings. This is the piston cooling jet, and it protrudes into the cylinder of the engine. Whenever we're trying to hone this thing with the dingleberry, it'll get in here and hurt this, so we took it off. This couldn't have happened on the number 1 cylinder. It'd be easy to get to. Had to be the one way back in the yonder here. So we got the crankshaft on bottom dead center, and we put as much grease around the cheeks of the crankshaft to keep debris out of the bearings as possible whenever we go to wash this stuff down. I had to modify my dingleberry hone by cutting it off because we're hitting the firewall here. But we can go all the way from the top, all the way to the bottom, and back up in a nice smooth motion. We're gonna need to add WD-40 to lubricate it though. The idea is just to go slow on the RPM, but then fast on the up and down motion to get a 45-degree crosshatch in the cylinder and keep plenty of lubrication on it. The way we measure piston to wall clearance is you measure the skirt of the piston. Then we go ahead and zero the dial bore gauge inside the micrometer. Then we come over here to the cylinder, and the smallest reading is going to be our piston to wall clearance, which is right at 4 thousandths. I've already measured this thing top to bottom, and it's the same. Our minimum piston to wall clearance is 3.9 thousandths of an inch. So we got Dawn dish soap in hot water and a cylinder cleaning brush. Clean as a whistle. Now we got the crankshaft all cleaned up. No more assembly lube. Cylinder wall's looking good. Here we're checking the piston ring gap, confirming that we at least have the minimum spec. got stuck in the block. That happens occasionally. That's it.
Should I stop the video now?
Yep. These connecting rod caps are a cracked style cap. Therefore, they can only go on one way. So you don't have to worry about orientation other than you just need to make sure it mates up properly. Here you can see the connecting rod cap does not line up properly this way. So we're going to turn the cap around and it will mate up perfectly on that cracked surface. Bam. Beautiful. You always measure protrusion over top of the wrist pin because the piston can rock side to side if you measure it on the skirt side. And we're just looking for the highest reading here, so the piston's going back down. I'm gonna go ahead and back the engine up. There it was. We're checking the rear, and we've got the same amount of protrusion, which helps confirm that the connecting rod is straight, just like the machine shop said. And our companion cylinder has the same amount of protrusion. The protrusion spec from Cummins is 6 to 19 on how far the piston can come out of the deck, and we're at 14, so we're well within the parameters to use a factory's thickness head gasket. If you've had the block decked, then your pistons would come out further and you would have to use a thicker head gasket, which they do sell for these. One of these is not like the other. Don't get your panties in a wad over these vertical scores. This was a patch job, and we knew, but there's nothing that catches your finger. It's just a visual imperfection. This engine will live a long, happy life like that. Not everybody wants to put a $30,000 engine in a truck that just can use a piston. Somebody got a little carried away with the paint. This entire gasket surface here was painted, so just get a little roll lock disc or a little 3M finger disc and go around and clean all this off here. Paint on this return port on the back of the head will not be a good sealing surface for the dowdy washers. That's mo better. When we're going to put the oil pan in, I rotate the engine to where these connecting rods are all flat in the bottom so that it's easiest to get that pan in, because these rods will hang down a couple of inches if it's at the bottom of the stroke. And don't worry about that rust. We had a really high moisture day here and it flash rusted all the exposed components. Nothing important is hurt. Parts washer got all those oil pan bolts looking nice. You do have to be careful with these oil pickup tube gaskets. You can line the bolts up like here, and the gasket will be offset from where it's supposed to be. And some people might not notice that, so you have to flip it this way. Now everything lines up perfectly. I put a little yellow mark on the gasket and on the pickup tube so that whenever it's installed in the truck, I'm not second guessing whether I have this flipped or not, because I will not be able to sleep at night. These Felpro oil pan gaskets are really high quality, nice thick gasket material, and they are made in the USA right there, boy. We got all the pan rail cleaned up. We will need to put a dab of silicone where the aluminum cover and the cast iron block meet. I use blue Loctite on all the pan bolts. Got our pickup tube torqued. Do not apply more than 18 foot-pounds of torque there. If you do, you can split the gasket. Went ahead and smeared our silicone on the cases, and now we can bolt the pan up. Here I've got a bore scope down inside the oil galley of the block. There are 6 oil feed ports for the cylinder head, and here we're just making sure that there's not an abundant amount of debris down inside that port. Change the camera mode here. Here's a vertical view of that oil port, and it looks pretty good, so we're gonna check them all. This is the oil feed port in the cylinder head that feeds the bottom of this rocker pedestal. Oil comes in here and then travels to both of the rocker arms. It's not a very large groove. If you had a big enough piece of debris, it could clog the oil passage and cause oil starvation to the rocker arms. I use a carbide scraper and a Scotch-Brite pad to prep the deck of these blocks. Don't forget to check and make sure your dowel pins are in the block. I had a 6-liter come in one time for head gaskets and it didn't have the dowel pins for the cylinder head. She's ready to go or blow, son. Put this head down here.
Yeah, it's on the dowels.
When I go to snug these studs down into the block, I use this little 90-degree attachment for my impact, and I get back in there and just run them down. You don't actually impact them into the block. Here I'm just using a little small 1/4-inch breaker bar to make sure that these studs are not actually over torqued into the block. They should just be hand tight. I prefer to use a brush on ARP assembly lube to lubricate the studs. You also have to lubricate both sides of the washers. I prefer to just dump the assembly lube in my fingers here and just work the washers back and forth before installing them on the cylinder head. Here I'm using a little 1/4-inch Milwaukee drill and just tightening down the nuts preliminarily so I can check the stud protrusion. I like to snug all the bolts down like that so that I can look at the top of the stud and make sure we have 100% thread engagement. Sometimes when you bottom tap these blocks, if you screw that stud all the way down into the block, you'll have like this stud will be 2 or 3 threads down inside the nut, and a lot of people just leave it like that. Well, I don't like to. I like to make sure every single one of these has 100% thread engagement, and all these are nice and flush or protruding past the nut just a little bit, and that's what we're after. I'm gonna have Michael torque this cylinder head, and sometimes you can go cross-eyed looking at all the bolts, trying to keep track of, you know, what sequence you are, because you got to go in an X pattern and from the center outward. So I went ahead and wrote all the numbers next to the stud so he can just keep track of it that way and not have to look at the paper. It took Michael 12 minutes to torque this cylinder head in 3 stages, 50, 100, and 150 foot-pounds on these ARP 625s. That's a job for Michael. Sheesh! I knew better than this. We only have 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 11 push rods. I gotta go fishing. Don't forget protection. Ta-da! Everything's here accounted for and cleaned. On these rocker arms, you do have to look in here on the pivot to make sure there's no scoring. These all look really good for the mileage on the truck. They're not in bad shape at all. These will also be really scored up on people's trucks if they don't maintain them. We don't want to assemble this thing dry, so I'm putting some engine assembly lube on these rockers. I could use engine oil, but this is a little bit easier to apply and not so messy in my opinion. Don't worry, I took her out to dinner first. Push rods are gonna get the same treatment. Nothing run dry on startup. It won't take long, so as long as it has a little film on it, that's all I'm after. The rocker arms have a little dot on them. That's supposed to face the exhaust manifold. I've seen people put them on the other way, and guess what? Nothing bad ever happened. But we're gonna put them on the right way. Okay, so the way that I like to set my valve lash is I do it 1 cylinder at a time. Cummins has you set it on top dead center, one of the cylinders, and then you can do like the intakes on some cylinders and the exhausts on others. I have ADHD and it drives me nuts. I'd prefer to do 1 cylinder, mark it off, next cylinder, mark it off. The way I do it is I rotate the engine over until the intake valve closes, and I just go a little bit more on the crankshaft rotation. I know I'm on base circle for the intake and the exhaust, and I go ahead and set my lash. Here we have a Hamilton cams. This is an aftermarket towing cam, which has more duration and more lift than your normal one would. We have these dial indicators set right down the center of the camshaft here. And I'm going to rotate this camshaft counterclockwise because as the engine rotates clockwise, the camshaft rotates counterclockwise. This is your intake lobe and this is your exhaust lobe. The argument a lot of people have is that setting it on compression stroke, that you're not on the base circle of the cam. Well, this is gonna prove that wrong. So we're rotating this is the intake valve as it comes to a close, which is here. We're gonna go ahead and continue rotating it until the exhaust starts to open. So we're on base circle on both those lobes until here. Look at how much rotation that is on that cam. So we've got at least 90 degrees almost of camshaft rotation before any of those come off of the base circle. The other thing you have to remember here is that the camshaft rotates at half the RPM of the crankshaft. So you would literally have to turn the crankshaft after the intake valve closes like 180 degrees to get off of the base circle of the exhaust. So I wait until the intake valve closes, which is the white gauge. I wait for the intake valve to close, and then I go just a little bit more, and then I set my valve lash because we're on base circle. You'd have to go a crap ton more to actually get that exhaust to start opening. So that's the way I like to do it. As I get done with each rocker arm, I go ahead and put some yellow paint on it so my ADHD knows that I've already done that one. Michael's getting ready to have a good time. So on these rocker box covers, you have to grind out this little half moon section for the head stud clearance. And we use a die grinder with a eat the ass out of Godzilla bit. This is what the piece looks like after it's modified. You see how flat this old manifold is. We haven't touched her yet. Not very good. We're only hitting on number 3 and 4 and 5. One eternity later. That belt sander's worth its weight in gold. Now it's time to put the turbocharger back together. We're gonna clean up this housing. It's got a lot of soot buildup in here and rust and debris that's gonna prevent this from going back together smoothly. Gotta get these old gaskets off, and underneath you get a lot of buildup from coolant over the years. Got her all cleaned up. Got the mating surfaces here, rust free. That's pretty disgusting. Got all that rubber off of the inlet here, so our new intake will seal all nice. And there's a little titty here that has to line up with a corresponding hole in the housing here. That's how it indexes it. We made a couple of small indexing marks there, so I know that's lined up perfectly, plus our titties lined up with the hole in the housing. Finally got this thing put back together, and the compressor wheel spins like it should, and the vanes move freely, so she's ready to go back on the truck. Now for my least favorite part is we are going to have to set this charger and manifold assembly in. We're gonna loosely assemble this and then use an engine hoist to stick it down there. I prefer to leave the hardware loose where the turbo and manifold go together, because you can see there's a fair bit of misalignment that can happen here, and if you get a little carried away and go ahead and tighten it now, you might have some problems lining up the downpipe to the exhaust. These turbochargers have coolant lines that run in and out the top and bottom. They use these braided hoses, and to seal, they use a banjo bolt that has a rubber impregnated washer. You can see there's still a bunch of rubber left over, and you clean that off so that there'll be a nice flat surface for the seals to seat up against. Same goes for these ugly things. Got all the corrosion off of them. They don't look real pretty, but they'll do their job. And then got these all shined up real nice. Now we got the downpipe hooked up and tight. I can go ahead and tighten the turbocharger mounting flange bolts and put the oil drain pipe gasket on. Torque adapters are a life hack. These things are great for tightening these turbo nuts. And while everything around here could get torqued in one way or another, I'm not that much of an anal retentive person. Just get the longest 3/8 ratchet you got and just give these things as many beans as you got in you. Because you can't over tighten them, but you can leave them loose. And the main reason for that is just look how much bulkier this torque wrench is in length and girth, you know? And in some situations, that's a good thing, but not when you're trying to torque something that's in a really tight area. There won't be a way for me to get any good video of this, but just know that that gasket for the turbo drain is a pain in the butt. Those turbo bolts never get more fun, but a little bit of a trick of the trade is if you got these chrome wobble sockets, you can put a wrap of electrical tape around it, and it doesn't really inhibit the amount that it flexes, but it does prevent it from just flopping over. And these are too bulky to get in there and don't have enough angle on them to get it started. And voila! Barely see that other bolt way up in there. It's a pain in the butt. We're finally ready to put the fuel system in. Took about 20 minutes to unbag all these dang injectors, but you want to make sure you keep them clean. We don't want anything getting inside the injector, otherwise that defeats the whole purpose of having brand new stuff. There's an O-ring here on the injector, and there's an O-ring on the feed tube. I will put some dielectric grease, just a nice thin coating, and then that way it snaps down into the head real nice. You don't have to force it and potentially tear the O-ring. We have found nothing better for O-rings than dielectric grease. It doesn't tear the O-ring up, and it's ridiculously slippery. Works extremely good for everything. Got a light coating of the dielectric on there. Got our injector retainer installed. We just point the hole in the injector body towards the driver's side of the vehicle. You idiot.
What are you? An idiot sandwich.
This is what I get for being out of the shop for 3 months. I forgot on common rails you have to remove the exhaust rocker to install and service the injectors. So I'm gonna be real honest with you. We're just gonna take all the rocker arms off and keep them in order here so we don't have to readjust the valve lash because there's no reason to. Got them all pulled off and in order from 1 to 6. Now we can put our injectors in. Listen to this.
Nice.
And then same with the connector feed tube. Don't want to drag the tip through any of the dirt. Or well, if you have a dirty cylinder head, you don't want to drag tips. So I always just kind of aim it in there. It's got a little locating dowel. You just push and it'll click in. Bam. This is where I see the most problems with common rail fuel systems for installation wise, is people not following the torque procedure, and they'll end up with a extended crank or low fuel rail pressure under wide open throttle, etc. It's extremely important that this connector feed tube intersects the injector properly and is torqued properly. So I start by threading these 2 bolts here by hand all the way down evenly. So I turn this one a little, turn that one a little, you know, with 2 hands, and get those snug. And then you torque the injector to 44 inch-pounds, you torque the tube to 11 foot-pounds, then you come back and torque the injector to 71 inch-pounds, and then you final torque the tube to 41 foot-pounds. It's also extremely important that your socket that you're gonna be tightening the connector feed tube with is nice and clean. Any dirt that gets in here can potentially get into your fuel system and then cause a stuck injector, premature failure, etc. Check out these man-sized scissors. Beautiful. The fuel rail looks brand new now, thanks to all the clear coat peeling off after it went through the parts washer. And I wasted several cans of brake clean getting in and out all these orifices and stuff and cleaning the lines up real good and blowing through them all. So I'm very confident that this will not have a problem with getting debris in the injectors, because there's only like a few grains of sand that had made it up in here because of how these people that took it apart stored it all. And these lines, none of these lines had rust. The only 2 lines that had rust are the ones that we have brand new now. So everything should go really nice and smoothly here. Here we're looking down the rail. You can see there's no more debris like there was before. There's no reason to over torque the crap out of these fuel lines. I've had to cut them off with a Sawzall before because I broke a snap-on fuel line socket trying to take them off. Also, I apologize for all the voiceovers I've had to do on this video. Going forward, I'll be using a microphone while recording the content, so you shouldn't have to deal with it. I'm a solid 10 hours into editing this video right now, and the following clip after I shut my mouth here is what takes me so long, because I'm trying to do away with all these stupid little blips and clicks in the audio. Torque the crap out of these. 30 foot-pounds is all it takes. We need 2 of these banjo bolts for the fuel return line, and there's only 1 in the parts pile that I was given, so thankfully I'm a bit of a hoarder. And we have lots of Cummins fittings. Here we're looking at the back of the cylinder head, and you can see I have both the Dowdy washers installed. I couldn't tell if that one up close to the block had fallen out. Now we're looking at the one buried down here. You can see we're good to go. Got 1 and 2. When going to install these rubber gaskets that have to push down inside these valve covers, you'll spray them down with some 3M dry silicone spray. They'll go into the groove much easier. Nice and flat all the way down. And you, no focusing. That is the stud that we had to grind that rocker cover to. That is the head stud we had to grind. Mother.
Have you ever had a dream that you want him to do you so much you could do anything?
That is the head stud we had to grind this rocker box cover to clear. The upper valve cover gasket on these trucks has the wiring harness built in, so it rarely gets replaced because this is like $600. They also rarely fail. I have seen this gasket here. It's like a rubber gasket, and then it's got plastic that separates the two pieces of rubber. I have seen this rubber pull out of here, so just make sure it's in all the way around before you stick it in. You just drop it down. This is where I see the most amount of common rail injector failures is people over tightening these little bitty nuts for the electrical connection. It's only 13 inch-pounds. It is nothing. What'll happen is if you over tighten it, it'll snap the stud off. Then you gotta buy a new injector. Just to give you an idea how little 13 inch-pounds of torque is, I got a little 8mm socket in here that's covered in oil, and so pretty much those nuts are hand tight. Here we're looking at the driver's side intercooler outlet, and you can see there's just some bugs and stuff there on the left side. I'm not worried about that, and there's not really a good way to clean it without removing the charge cooler, but the engine will eat that and never look back. And the reason there's any debris in there at all is because these people that worked on it prior just left all this open to the elements. From the factory, these trucks have a plastic heater hose elbow that goes onto a fitting here, and it's right next to the EGR cooler, and that gets brittle and breaks. So thankfully Black Market Performance came out with this just AN push lock adapter, but goes in there like that and works out really good. Ensures you never have to deal with that again. I use a little bit of PTFE for the threads. From the factory on this hose there would be a spring clamp, and you can see the remnants of where that used to be. We prefer to use these Gates heat shrink hose clamps. There's the part number there. When you're done heating it up, you can see the individual ridges from the push lock fitting underneath, and this will provide a nice lifelong repair for this plastic heater hose elbow problem. These heat shrink hose clamps, we like them because they are a constant tension hose clamp, meaning that whenever the truck warms up, it causes this hose clamp to shrink more, and then it actually, even when it cools down, shrinks more in the cold. So these provide a nice leak-free seal in all of our experience. Something I find interesting is that cabin chassis always have some oddball stuff. So this elbow where it goes onto the exhaust manifold would normally use this gasket here on a non-cabin chassis 6.7. But on this truck, thankfully, it's the exact same gasket as the exhaust manifold. And I've got tons of gaskets, and so I had a couple of manifold gaskets I can use here. Got those coolant holes on nice and clean. Don't forget to shake your oil. All the additive packages fall out after they sit for a while in the bottom of the container, so you get it all stirred back up in there. Check all the doo-doo out in that valve cover drain port. That's mo better. Really? Check out all the pitting around where that thermostat seal sits. No bueno. Ain't that nice? I made an index mark before I took this apart, so I can go ahead and heat shrink hose clamp this real nice and easy with the hose here. The truck didn't come with any of the housing bolts for the thermostat, so just come over here to the metric bolt bin. And there we are. I grabbed one too many though. Okay, I had to search for a socket for like 5 minutes. It's time to put up all the tools on all the roll carts because I am not in the mood for searching for tools. This is everything that was on or around the truck. This is what the factory intake elbow looks like on these 6.7 Cummins trucks. They've got a connection right here, and that's right where this Black Market Performance intake heater relocation kit goes. Uses a 7.3 Power Stroke air intake heater. Ooh, doggy, she hot. That's the finished product. Added in a dowel clamp to the intake there so it looks nice and factory and supported. Check out the threads on that intercooler clamp. Story of my life. It locked up before it ever even got close to being tight, so gotta go to the Horde. The Horde always provides. Here I'm just using my little M12 die grinder with a Scotch-Brite pad to clean off all this rust from these smooth pulleys to keep the belt from making noise. What's hiding down in the bottom of the fuel bowl? It was a torn fuel filter O-ring. This is the filter that came out of it. You can see it has a blue O-ring on the bottom of it. Somebody got a little rough with her. Check out how few pleats that filter has compared to a genuine Mopar filter. And then this one has an O-ring, which obviously not the greatest design, versus the Mopar has a just like a wiper seal. And so you can't really tear that going into the housing. So much better idea. So right now we're missing an O-ring for this hose here and an O-ring for that EGR cooler there. I am also waiting to install the alternator until I get those put on because that is right in the way. So what I'm saying is we're gonna bust this old girl off as she sits. It's ready to go. Got the old Top Don jump box on this girl since the batteries are kind of low. And we're gonna watch our desired versus actual rail pressure. So we have fuel rail on the top and fuel rail pressure desired. So let's crank it. Come on, baby, you can do it. Jeez. Old girl sounds smooth, boy. Next, we're gonna need us some Christmas tree zip ties. I call them that because they look like a Christmas tree to me. We just get them off Amazon. They work really well. There's a part number. The factory uses them to hold wiring harnesses in place, and you can see these are pretty deteriorated and will not hold that harness very well. Pull right out. Don't that look nice? The bolts that hold the alternator on have this little spacer here, and as you tighten this bolt, it'll pull this spacer in, which crushes the cast iron bracket that goes here. So if you'll watch this spacer whenever I tighten this bolt, see how it pulled in? That's normal. Whenever you take this alternator off, that spacer doesn't automatically move out. So you gotta like pry the alternator off, and then whenever you're going to put it back on, it's a real pain in the butt, unless you thread this bolt in, and then you hit this bolt with a hammer, and it'll push this spacer back out. Watch the spacer. See how it moved all the way out? Now this alternator will get installed really easy. Mira, muy bueno. Installing the belt on a Cummins is a royal pain in the butt unless you take the tensioner bolt loose and pull it out like this so that you can fish that belt around the backside of the pulley. So now that we got the fan clutch and shroud installed and loosely snugged up on the hub, you're going to want to get you an air hammer with a long bit like this to get down in there. And I'm just joking. Don't ever let me catch you putting one of these fan clutches on with a damn air hammer with a chisel. Because what happens, the fan hub is not very thick, and so you'll crush the exterior of that large nut down onto the hub and then destroy everything when you go to take it off. Instead, especially if you're a professional, you need to invest in a fan clutch installer tool. Oh. So you're still going to use your air hammer and your professional tool, because you're a professional, not a hack. You reach down yonder. Now she's tight. Well, these people took it apart are the gift that just keeps on giving. Since they didn't give the intake tube back to it, we're missing the little metal piece that goes from the crankcase filter down to the intake. Just so we can test drive this thing, because I don't have one of those hoses handy, we just masking taped off that. We're just going to let this just breathe out here. It won't be a problem. This is the only code we have in the system after doing all this work. That's probably the problem. Here you can see in the drop-off picture that that sensor is broken off of that negative terminal, so that's not something we did. Here we're pulling a vacuum on the cooling system so we can fill it. So we'll let this sit here for a minute and make sure that our vacuum doesn't drop. If it drops, then that means we have a leak somewhere in the system. This truck uses Mopar 10-year coolant, and the way we get a perfect 50-50 mixture by filling this up to the 2,000 milliliter mark. And this is reverse osmosis water. We just keep it in these Motorcraft jugs, and then we fill it up the rest of the way with the 10-year coolant all the way to the 4,000 milliliter line. Give her your old stir stick routine, and she's ready to go in her home. See what the old refractometer has to say. Just dip it. Y'all tell me. She's right at 50. This is the reverse osmosis outlet here. There's all the filters and stuff, and then as we're starting to use it, it will start to refill the tank, and it'll start putting the wastewater out of this fitting here. See, good water, bad water. Now we're ready to start filling her up. Alright, we got a couple of miles on it. It's all up to operating temperature. Like my old boss used to say, I'd rather the engine blow up on me, and if it's gonna blow up, might as well do it now, so. It didn't blow up. That's good. Got 105 miles on it now. Still sounds really good. The check engine light is for that battery sensor and the crankcase vent hose. My boy Russell Caraway came through, saved the day with this usually discarded piece of air intake equipment. Mira, dos pieces, no bueno. Uno, bueno. We got 150 miles on this old girl. We got no codes, that's what we're after. We put the factory 12 quarts in this thing and check out how low it is on the dipstick. It took an extra 3 quarts of oil to get this thing to the top of the safe mark. This truck's oil capacity is 12 quarts, and we put 12 quarts in, and you saw when we first pulled the dipstick that it was just barely at the bottom of the stick. The reason that it holds more now, it's not that it holds more, it's just that the engine was completely dry. The cylinder head didn't have any oil in it, and it holds a bunch in all those cavities. Whenever you pull the oil pickup tube, there's oil in there. Whenever you drop the oil out of the pan when you're doing an oil change, you don't get all the oil. There's like an extra pint sitting in the bottom of the pan that doesn't drain out. So whenever we clean the oil pan out, all these surfaces that we cleaned up on the block had oil on them. It just all adds up, but that's why you got to double check that. 200-mile test drive update. Said full operating temperature. Nothing. She's mint, old son. Had Michael wash it up a little bit. Looks a lot nicer. We put battery terminal protectant on the terminals. And got that crankcase vent hose installed. She's mint. After our 200-mile test drive, there isn't a drop of oil underneath this thing. So, she's ready to go home. It's important to always double check your work. I'm not real thrilled with how this heater hose is resting on, or it's just barely above that EGR cooler. And I think I can fix it by rotating this hose on this fitting here. I'm not sure why this cabin chassis truck has this heater hose so close to this EGR cooler to begin with. They got plenty of room to go straight back and then curve around. Thanks to this handy Mac Tools coolant vacuum, I was able to pull a vacuum, remove that fitting, twist that hose inside there. And now we got miles of room between the hose and the cooler. So I'll sleep better tonight knowing that's not touching. Back to work for you, old girl. Sheesh. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.